guys, it's Robin, RS Island Crafts, and welcome to my craft room. Today we are going to make a simple, quick 10 or 15 minute sunglass case. Now I wouldn't recommend this sunglass case for your really expensive sunglasses, but maybe since you have kids or you tend to lose or break your sunglasses a lot, you just buy the $5 or $10 ones that you can pick up at Walmart or a pharmacy or something like that. But you've been having problems with them always getting scratched on the lens. Well, we can make this nice little case here that's going to protect them and keep them from getting scratched. We put my glasses back on so that I can see what I'm doing, so we can go ahead with the little tutorial we got going. So as you can see, it has an opening to it for you to slide your glasses in, of course, and it has some batting and some cotton fabric on the outside. It doesn't have a closure or anything, so if you're the type of person that just kind of tosses it into your bag and stuff, you might want to add a little Velcro closure to the top, or maybe an elastic that goes around the button, or a snap. But this is for the person that wants to just maybe keep it in the car so that your sunglasses are protected from getting scratched, and maybe if your kids don't see them, they won't steal them for you. And if you always put them back into the case, maybe you won't lose them or leave them on top of the car or something. Not that I've done anything like that, right? It's also good when you're going to the beach and you just want to toss something into your beach bag, into your tote bag. You can pop your sunglasses in there and stick it right in. So let's go ahead and make one. And if you stay with me to the end, I will show you how to turn this into a scrap buster project, even though we're really only using small squares, but I'll show you how to use up even smaller pieces of fabric. Now this one ends up, when we're all done, it's about 6 3/4 by 3 3/4. So just for your basic pair of sunglasses. If you have anything that's larger, you can always adjust it for a smaller piece for kids' glasses, or a larger piece of fabric that we start with for larger glasses. So it's going to be very adjustable to your needs. I have a 7.5-inch piece of regular quilting cotton fabric for the outer. I also have a 7.5-inch piece of quilting cotton for the lining. And I'm using a 7.5-inch square of regular cotton batting to give it that little extra bit of security and protection in there. You can use fusible fleece if you have it. You can use any type of batting that you have, whatever your preference is. I just like this cotton batting. It's nice and thin, and it just gives it that little bit of a squishy feel to it. I probably wouldn't use a stabilizer or interfacing and everything, because you want that little bit of an extra protection. Now this isn't going to protect your glasses if your kids or the dog come and step on it, or if you drop it on the ground and accidentally step on it yourself. If you want to use it for a nicer pair of glasses, maybe use some of that foam that they have. They have a double-sided adhesive foam that you can use for that. Now that would work good. It'd give you that little bit extra protection if you have a little bit of a nicer pair of glasses. So you take your batting and you take your outer fabric. Now if you're using the fusible fleece, you don't have to worry about quilting it at all, or if you don't want to. It is a small piece. It doesn't necessarily have to be quilted, but just to keep it all together and to go ahead and just make it a little bit nicer, I'm going to go ahead and do some quilting. You can do a very simple quilting, or you can break out some of those fancy stitches on your sewing machine. If you need to practice your free motion quilting, here would be a good time to do that. If you're just sewing this and you're not really a quilter, you can just use that fusible fleece and it'll work out fine. As I said, it's a very small piece. I'm just going to go ahead and do some straight line. I did straight line on a diagonal for this, and that kind of makes it look, if your lines don't have to be perfect anywhere else, they're not matching up to any sides either way, and I like this, makes it a little bit quirky. Now remember, we're just using our cotton batting and our cotton fabric on top, our fancy outer fabric. Now I have my stitch length at about a 3.0. I'm not even going to measure the distance. I'm not even going to keep it like an inch. Sometimes I like to use the presser foot or this little black little button here on the side to measure by. But I'm just going to kind of put 1, 2, 3. I put 4 on the last one. So I think I'm going to have my center one, and I'll just put a couple over on the side here. Now some of them will probably get all the way up in the corner, so it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But as I said, since this is being folded over, you're not going to notice them. It's not going to stick out. I am using white on this one, so it will be a little bit noticeable, but it's all going to work out fine. Then I just spin it around and do it on the other side. Now you could take a ruler and you could tape any type of a marking tool that you would use that does not permanent, that would either come off with the iron or with some water. You can make some lines, use a, I think it's a hair marker that makes a little crease down it that you can follow, anything you want. As you can see, I don't have everything equal. I kind of like the quirkiness of that. I'm going to take it over and I'm just going to give it a good press just to set those stitches in there so it's nice. And then you want to trim this down so that it's 7.5 inches. You can just follow your outer fabric. You can use scissors or you can use your quilting ruler and your rotary cutter. Now, since I'm using quilting cotton, I just did straight line quilting and it's okay. But if I were to do a lot of free motion quilting, it would tend to shrink my fabric and my batting down, because that's what happens when you do a lot of quilting on cotton batting. So if that's something you're going to do, just make sure you start out, give it about a good 1/2 inch, maybe an inch more. So maybe start out with an 8 or an 8.5 inch square of both your cotton and your batting, but keep your lining fabric still at 7.5 inches. Now, as you can see, my fabric is directional. So I want to make sure when that I put this on that I have it so that this is going to be my top. I want to make sure that I'm always paying attention that this is going to be the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put right sides together of my lining and of my quilted piece. I'm going to go ahead and remember that this is the top. If I want to make sure that I remember, I can always take my clip and just put a little pin or a clip in the top so that I remember that that's where the top is. And I'm going to fold it in half from left to right. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make this little rounded part. Now don't worry, because if you forget about the rounded part, you know, most sunglasses and eyeglass cases have this rounded piece. But if you forget, you'll just end up with one with a squared bottom. It's okay. There was no sense in me taking it apart and starting all over again. I just now have a case that has a square part. I can still use it for eyeglasses. I could put a pair of scissors in it. I can go ahead and put my rotary cutter in it. Kids can put pens and pencils or whatever they want in it, and it still works perfectly fine. Depending on the size of your scissors, they may or may not fit in there. These are a little bit long. Plus, I'd worry a little bit about the scissors eventually poking through that way. But it'll work perfectly fine for my sunglasses. Okay, so here's the top, and what we want to do is we want to make a rounded bottom. I have just here, this just happens to be the lid off of my cat's treats container. You can freehand this if you want. You're just going to end up drawing a little bit of a curve to it, because we just want to go ahead and round that off a little bit. Or you can put some type of a round item on it. It's all just gonna, depends on how you have it. Some people have circle curve devices. You can use a coffee cup or saucer plate, whatever you happen to have. Or as I said, you can just easily freehand it and it's perfectly fine. Then we're going to trim this corner. And if it just doesn't have enough of a curve, just go ahead and give it a little extra on the edge there. It'll be fine. Okay, so we still have it to where our cats and dogs, where it's raining, cats and dogs are facing upright the way we want it. We have the right sides facing, so this is the right side of my lining facing to the right side of my outer piece. I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to leave an opening up here. This is where we're going to go ahead and turn it. So you want to leave about 2, maybe 3 inches. It's not a thick piece of material that we're working with here. So I found I had started with a larger opening and then I went to a smaller one, and it was just as easy to do the smaller one as it was to do the larger ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back tack here and then go all the way around. I'm going to do about 1/4 inch and back tack here. If you're new at sewing and you're not used to getting too close to the edge, you can go ahead and do a 1/2 inch or 3/8 inch and just stitch all the way around. And when we're going around the corners, you can lift up your foot and put it down, but it's such a small corner that if I just take my left hand and guide it like this, and I go slow when I'm stitching and not go Speedy Gonzales, I'll be able to stitch around that curve nicely. If you want, you can go ahead and put some clips or pins on here. I'm going to go with 1/4 inch. Back stitch a little. When I get to the corner, I'm going to go slow. I'm going to leave my needle down, turn my project, put my presser foot back down so that I can continue stitching around the piece. And when I get to the corner, I'm going to go slowly, and I'm just going to slowly guide with this left hand, and it's just following at the side of my presser foot here until I get, now the end of your fabric is going to be going straight before your needle does because it's a little bit further back. So I'm just going to keep going, and I can always lift up my presser foot and bring myself back to going straight. Same thing on this corner. Might want to turn myself to get me going to start with. Now, if for some reason when you were cutting and trimming, your two pieces didn't line up perfectly, just go ahead and pick one of them. Like I'm looking right here and I have just a little bit of my outer fabric showing, not even 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to decide that I'm going to still follow my outer fabric, and my lining, my seam allowance is just going to be a little bit shorter on my lining. But it's going to be fine because we're going to flip it around and we're going to be top stitching, so it's going to hold everything secure. Now, if you use your 3/8 inch seam allowance, at this point you'd want to go ahead and trim it down to 1/4 inch. I'm also going to cut off these corners here. I'm going to go a few threads away from my stitching line. I don't want to cut through my stitching, but if I did, I could just put it back under the machine and maybe make a little bit more of a seam allowance, take it in just a little bit, and then go back over, and that'll fix any of the problems if I happen to cut through it. And when we're working on the corners down here, we also want to smooth them out a little bit just so we don't have too much of a seam allowance. And we want to clip it in the seam allowance. That just allows it to turn evenly and you can have a nice smooth curve. If you notice when you're having problems and your curve is kind of lumpy and stuff, that just means that your seam allowance needs to be trimmed just a little bit. Make sure you don't cut through the seam, your stitching, but once again, if you do, you just put it back underneath the machine and fix it. This allows it to open up and spread a little bit so that the fabric can go ahead and go around the curve. We don't have to worry about our straight edges just as long as we take care of those curves. And we're going to go ahead and take it. I can just put my fingers in here. You can go ahead and use something like hemostats to grab it, but I left the hole open enough that it's easy enough to just go ahead and pull it out. I like to use the plastic crochet hook to poke out the corners. You may have something else around the house that you can use. You can use the eraser end of a pencil. Some people use the scissors, but that just scares me. I would poke right through the fabric. You can use something, just anything that's not too pokey at the end. And with something like this, you can really just put your hand in there and run your finger along it. You just have a slight curve. You don't have any deep corners except for the two on the top. And those are very easy just to poke out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my iron and I'm going to give it a nice press. I want to have it so that when I press it, that none of my backing is showing on my front. I want to do the best I can that if it's going to be uneven, I'd rather have the outer fabric showing up on the lining because that's going to be on the inside where nobody can see it. And then up here on the top, I'm just going to bring in both of these pieces and I'm going to do the best I can to line it up so that it looks even across the top. Sometimes you just have to roll it out a little bit. Sometimes you have to roll it in. When you get this lined up nicely, you can go ahead and put a couple pins in it or pop a clip in it. So when you take it over and give it a nice press, remember to remove your clip or your pins if you're pressing it. I'm a lover of steam, so I give it a nice shot of steam to make sure everything lay nicely. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just do a top stitch along the top here, and that's going to close up our hole. And when we top stitch all the way around, it's just going to go ahead and make it match up and look like we did it all together. So about 1/8 of an inch. Whatever your normal stitch length is, you can go down to a 2.5, 2.0, whatever you prefer. This is not going to be something, I mean, we are going to hold it and push a little bit on it, but everything's been stitched nicely. It's mainly just to close up our turning hole. I do like to back stitch it just so that the thread doesn't come undone as we're using it. And back stitch at the end. So I've gone ahead and I stitched across the top. That closed up my turning hole. If you want, you could use one of your fancy stitches and put it across here. Some little fun decorative stitch from your machine. And then after this, we're going to go ahead and turn it with our lining side facing. We're going to line it up. And I'm going to go ahead and put some clips in here. We're going to top stitch all along and we're going to close it. So all our stitching is going to be on the outside now. Line up your corner the best you can. Now you can kind of feel where all your seams are in here, so it's going to be a little bit bulky, so you're going to want to go slow, but we're going to go ahead and just do our top stitching about 1/8 of an inch all the way around here, and that's just going to close everything up and turn it into our eyeglass case. Takes a little bit to get it started. Sometimes you have to kind of help it go through. I would go a little bit slow here because, as I said, we have a lot of seams. We don't need to be speed demon. Trim our little threads. There you go, eyeglass case. If you're going to be making a bunch of these for a craft fair or to sell at school or for in your online shop or something, I suggest putting a new needle in, a nice sharp one, before you get started so that your machine doesn't have any struggle as it's going through here. We can always take it over and give it a nice press just to make sure everything is all laying nice after we did all that stitching. Really, it's only about a 10 or 15 minute project. I think this is really easy for a beginner to do, and it would be really quick for anyone who has been sewing for a while. So let's talk about other ways we can make this. Now, I did use just regular fabric for both of them, full pieces. I didn't piece it or anything like that. If you have an old quilt block, you can go ahead and use that on it. Even if it's a little bit taller, if you have an 8-inch quilt block or 8.5, you can either trim it down or just make your eyeglass case a little bit taller. So here's the first one I made. Now with this one, I thought, well, I'll start at the bottom here and I'll work my way up, and I was being a smart aleck and I didn't use any pins or clips. So what happened is right here, I have that little bit extra that's sticking out. Maybe 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. So you can have those glasses that come down here so that it's easy to slide it in. Now I can use this as my excuse so that it's easier to slide in, or I can use it as my reasoning that I wanted to show you how to make a mistake and what you can do to fix it. And my fix for this one is, hey look, it still works. It's perfectly fine. Most people may not even notice that. And if it bothers anyone, keep it for yourself. Here's my other oops where it's squared off. No problem, it's still gonna work perfectly fine. I made a string block. I laid down my batting and then I laid my strings on the diagonal, and I just made it like I would a quilt as you go string block, and that worked out really nice. So in case you wanted to use up some of your string scraps. The only thing I did notice is you have a lot of extra seams when you're going around here. So go slow and be prepared to hear a little bit of a clunkety clunk as you're going. You could always switch out to a jeans needle if you wanted to do this section. This one I used the calculator strip where we sew the scraps down onto the paper and then tear off the paper. So this is some leftover from when we were doing the Valentine's projects. So I put that right down the center, and I just went ahead and cut a piece of fabric and stitched it on this side, and on this side trimmed it down to 7.5 inches, and then I went ahead and made it just like we did. I'm noticing on here that this one pulled in a little bit. I used the same lining fabric as I did on the outside here, so it's not even noticeable unless you're actually looking at it, because with the regular eye it just all blends in. It's stitched nicely, there's no problems with it, it's not going to fall apart. It just happened to get pulled in. You could also just take, if you wanted your calculator strip, to put one here and have a solid piece of fabric on the center. So you'd have your calculator strip on each side. So that's another way to do it. This one is a crumb block. I just went ahead and built some crumbs from all the little crumbs that someone had sent me. Some of these pieces were already stitched together. I just added more on. I did some stitching across this way for my quilting, and then I went straight down on a couple of the seams here. This one looks like it lined up nicely all the way around, so this one actually turned out perfectly. Couple little threads to trim, and that's about it. A lot of times when you're making crumb blocks, you'll be finding extra threads that pulled through on your crumb blocks. And then I took a selvage one. So for this one, I just cut out my 7.5 inch square, and I started laying my selvages down. You can pay attention top and bottom. I had a few with some words on it. So what I had is the selvages on the bottom with the print going up, so that if it was going this way, it would be, you'd be able to read any of the writing that's on the selvages. This one's a VI print by Joan Messmore. And anytime that we're doing the selvages, I did go a little bit past the frayed for this one, and otherwise I just went 1/4 inch, and I laid this on top of the other one. I'll go ahead and link to some videos on how to do the selvages. So whether you want to use scrappy and use up some of the scraps you have, or you want to just go ahead and use a straight piece of fabric. I made these 7 in just a little bit over an hour. So you can really whip these out really quickly for a craft fair or a school bazaar or something like that. These are great for gifts for friends or for teachers, or to use them yourself. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you start sewing these now, you can have a few ready for Christmas. If we start sewing now, when it comes time for Christmas time, we'll have a nice stockpile of gifts already in our gift bin, and we can enjoy the month of December and create stuff for ourselves instead of having to worry about making gifts. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Remember, always create with Scrapitude.